Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amy Baker. I'm Canada's ambassador to Norway, and I am so pleased to welcome you to Inaction and Overreaction, Perspectives on Climate, Resilience, and Security in the Arctic. And perspectives we have today. Today's panel brings together diverse views and ideas from different backgrounds. And this is actually the key to this event. We often end up addressing the Arctic as if it is one homogeneous territory. But we have to remember its diversity. And so it is vital that we examine the issue from a variety of different angles, which means it is a very good thing that we have such a talented moderator to keep things moving. Crystal Martin is a highly respected and accomplished leader in Inuit advocacy, focusing on improving the lives of Inuit through mental health, education, infrastructure, and climate change interventions and policy. As I know you will introduce your panelists, Crystal, I just want to say a word of welcome to you and thank you in advance for agreeing to lead us through this complex and important series of discussion points. And I'm going to take the privilege of the microphone to thank my own team for their work in pulling this event together, particularly Bjorn Petter Ranez, who saw this in my speech and was threatening to cross it out, but without whom I am quite sure we would not be sitting here together today. So Bjorn Petter, thank you very much for all your effort in pulling this together today. And now, before we get to the panel, I have to say that we are so lucky to have the Canadian Prime Minister's Special Envoy to the European Union and Europe, Mr. Stéphane Dion, with us today. Given his professional background, the concept driving today's event fits perfectly with his experience and wisdom. And I am not just saying that because he's my former boss. You may know that Special Envoy Dion was Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2015 to 2017. But did you know that before that he was Minister of Environment, during which time he secured one of the greenest budgets in the history of Canada? As Minister responsible for official languages, he crafted and launched the Action Plan for Official Languages, still used as a reference today. As Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, he played a primordial role in promoting Canadian unity. He has served as a leader of the Liberal Party of Canada and leader of the official opposition, and has been re-elected 7 times as a member of Parliament. Before entering politics, Mr. Dion taught political science at the Université de Moncton and Université de Montréal. There are many more accolades and accomplishments that I could share, but I've chosen these experiences because here's the thing: he has held strategic leadership positions on climate, on security, on resilience and Canadian unity, and on languages. Mr. Dion brings an incredibly rich perspective to share with us ahead of this discussion, which will bring together the threads of climate, resilience, and security in the Arctic. And this is Mr. Dion's second Arctic Frontiers Conference, a fact that reinforces just how important this event is for Canada as an Arctic country, and the values that we place on the discussions, analysis, and recommendations that grow from the rich interactions and dialogue taking place this week. With that, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to invite Special Envoy Dion to take the floor and officially open our event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Ladies and gentlemen, my job is to set the stage for our excellent panel. And in order to do so, I think the best way for me will be to focus on climate change impacts. Not because everything that is happening in the Arctic is linked to climate, but through climate change impacts, you are able to embrace a lot of the issues of the Arctic, and it will set the stage, I think, in a very powerful way. There are 2 ways to look at that. It is first the climate change impacts on the Arctic system, and second, the climate change impact on the Arctic system, impact on the planet. Because as it has been said today by many people, what is happening in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic and affect the whole world. Once I will have done that very rapidly, I will give you an indication of the initiatives that the government of Canada is promoting to improve the international cooperation to tackle these kind of issues. So climate change impact on the Arctic ecosystem. I will list 8 impacts. I think they are the main ones. The first one is the melting of the sea ice, which is endangering several species. We think about the iconic polar bear, but there are many others. Second, a decline in certain types of vegetation will disrupt the food chain. Third, marine fish stocks will be affected as well. 4, problems caused by invasive insects and plants. And among these problems, you will have diseases. 5th, forest fires are worsening. 6, the thawing permafrost will increasingly affect the stability of vital infrastructure, buildings, transportation, communications, energy, and so on. 7th, unpredictable weather, the melting of lakes and rivers and sea ice, and thawing permafrost again will make, and is already making, a lot of travel route unsafe. 8, what many scientists are predicting, that is, if the Arctic could be seasonally ice-free in 10 to 30 years from now, this will open an unprecedented economic development opportunity. And that's good news if it's well done, if it's well designed. And it's a big if. You will have a lot of agitation on the Arctic. 22% of the oil reserve of the world are in the Arctic. And if these reserves become more reachable, you will see the activity there. But we have also a lot of the critical minerals and rare earth that the world needs to switch from oil to renewable energy. For that, you need these resources, and a lot of them are in the Arctic. So you will have a lot of mining activities and so on. Canada, which is a leader in mining industry, Canada has a tremendous responsibility to find a way to make it sustainable. If we don't make it sustainable, we'll put at risk the ecosystem of the Arctic. We'll have not a sustainable development, but a self-destructive development. So we need to see that this increasing activity in the Arctic will increase the risk of shipping accidents, catastrophic oil spills, or other environmental disasters, especially given inadequate mapping, lack of critical infrastructure, and weak local response capacity. If you have a disaster, you want a strong capacity to address this disaster in the Arctic. So that's the way climate change will put at risk the ecosystem of the Arctic. Now, what that means for the planet, how climate change impacts on the Arctic are impacting the world. I see 6 ways. First, Arctic land ice loss is a major contributor of global sea level rise. Global sea level rise. So when the ice melts in the Arctic, it's going everywhere in the world, the global sea level rise. Second, if extensive ice-covered areas are to disappear, if the white cover disappeared, then the Arctic becomes darker, and then the Arctic will not be able to put back part of the heat of the sun back in the atmosphere. It will stay on the planet, and then it will make climate change worse and happening more rapidly. Third, this heat imbalance may alter global ocean currents. The science is not sure about that, but there is a risk. Imagine if, for example, the Gulf Stream was changing its route, what consequences it would mean for the whole continent of Europe. 4, permafrost, again, permafrost. Permafrost release, because permafrost is melting, permafrost will release a considerable amount of methane. And methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. Again, what will happen in the Arctic may make climate change worse and happening more rapidly. And it's the same for my fifth point. You have, because of global warming, you have acidification of the Arctic. And the acidification of the Arctic Ocean, which will, among many problems, will weaken zooplankton. And zooplankton is not only a critical element of the food chain, but also of carbon sequestration. If you have less carbon sequestration because you have less zooplankton, then again, climate change will become worse and will happen more rapidly. 6, well, I mentioned the risk of miscalculation in the Arctic. You will have a lot of military activity in the Arctic more and more. And you may have then a greater geopolitical tensions that will affect the whole planet. Mutual mistrust, miscalculation. So that's the way by which climate may affect the Arctic and the planet. And this being said, we need to act. We cannot say it's unavoidable. We need to increase our ability to fight these terrible effects. So what are Canada's action to enhance cooperation in the Arctic? I will give you only a glance of what Canada is doing because I want to hear the panel. I don't want to be too long. But here again, I will list some points that Canada is pushing, some initiatives Canada is taking. The first one, Canada is doing its best to preserve the Arctic Council good management and the multilateral action, despite the tragic context where Arctic cooperation is seriously affected by Putin's unjustifiable war of aggression against Ukraine, which means that the situation cannot be business as usual with Russia, and Russia is 50% of the Arctic. So that's a very difficult situation, and Canada is doing its best to preserve the Arctic Council good functioning. Second, Canada is making significant investments in public infrastructure, as well as internet connectivity, northern road access, maritime ports and corridors, and reducing communities' dependency on diesel. So we are increasing our investments, but we need to do much more on each of these issues. Third, Canada is very willing to cooperate with like-minded allies on these investments. We don't want to do it alone. We want to do it with others. So on transportation, logistics, telecommunications, northern infrastructure, cold climate manufacturing, as well as shipbuilding, Canada is willing to work with like-minded allies. Fourth, Canada is increasing its cooperation in research. For example, the Polar Knowledge Canada is very well involved. The Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, is a world-class innovation hub for science and technology. We have this initiative, the Global Arctic Leadership, where we work with the University of the Arctic, and so on. Fifth, Canada is promoting more international agreements relevant to the Arctic. You have, for example, the agreement to prevent unregulated high seas fisheries in the central Arctic Ocean, to determine whether fish stocks could be harvested in a sustainable way. So that's the kind of agreement Canada wants to promote. For example, we are working with the Arctic Council to develop a pan-Arctic network of marine protected areas. Canada is working with like-minded Arctic states at the International Maritime Organization to support safe shipping in the Arctic through the Polar Code and heavy fuel oil ban, and other initiatives of this kind. 6, Canada is committed to ensuring that the Arctic remains a region of peace and stability. I don't have the time to explain everything what Canada is doing on this file, but we are continuing to participate to joint training exercises. We are developing new technologies to improve Arctic surveillance and control, such as the replacement of the North Warning System. And in terms of boundary disagreements, we are pushing for more rules-based and diplomatic solutions, such as the agreement that Canada reached with Denmark on Hans Island. And my last point, my seventh point about our initiatives, but it's a very key one, sustainable development requires the involvement of Indigenous peoples. Canada is working to address complex border crossing and migration challenges faced by Indigenous peoples divided by international borders. We also encourage collaboration between Arctic Indigenous and non-Indigenous innovators across the circumpolar region. We must also facilitate joint meetings with Indigenous knowledge holders, including Northern and Indigenous youth, to share best practices. So these are some of the initiatives that Canada is implementing. I have only given you a broad parameters of Canada's action, but we have an excellent panel to listen to, and so I will stop here by wishing you all an excellent Arctic Frontiers Conference, rich in lessons learned and fruitful encounters. We need it, but more importantly, the Arctic needs it. Thank you very much.
Quinnami, Tuzaksawnga, Quinnami, Uvanga Niveta, Senayak Nunabu Mutaxiayunga, Quyerigibunga, Udlume, Tamane, Tunga Suktitawakama Elisino, Amanga Yukagi Yabuta, Takwa, Ukadlasakte, Quyerigi Pakatatao. Who Udlume, Apaksukatang Naktunga, Takwa uki utak tumiutang me kano asijilang ma silapu. And I'll speak English. I wanted to first speak Inuktitut, which is my first language. My name is Crystal. I am originally from Senariak, Nunavut, Canada. And it's an absolute privilege to be here this evening with you all and to be with the amazing panelists that we're going to be hearing from. And I'd first like to thank both the ambassador and also Mr. Dion for their opening remarks this evening and for providing such a warm welcome to us in Norway. Before we have the panelists, I would like to ask, and I'm so bad and I don't want to be butchering any names, but Andre Minif? Yes, okay, perfect. So Andre will be providing a presentation and then we will carry on the agenda as well.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Andre Minev. I work as a researcher at the Heino Center for Business at Nord University Business School here in Norway. It's a great honor for me to present some results of our work for you. I represent the project called Business Index North, and now it's developed under the name Being Arctic. So it got new name because now we study the whole Arctic. When we started Business Index North some years ago, we focused on the European part of the Arctic, and then we extended. On this slide, you can see the map of the regions we study. 25 regions from all 8 Arctic countries. We study opportunities and challenges for business and society development in the Arctic. And today I want to share some results based on our new tool called Arctic Resilience Monitor, and I think it will help us to see the great diversity we can see among the Arctic regions in terms of socio-economic trends. Before I present some numbers, let me introduce our analytical framework for this study of resilience. For us, resilience of socioeconomic systems is threefold. First, it's about persistence. Persistence is associated with coping capacities, leading to resistance to unwanted changes. So socioeconomic system has to be strong to resist some unwanted changes, but it's not enough. Of course, there is a need for capacities such as adaptability and transformation. Adaptability is about capacities to adjust to changing conditions of the environment, but still it's about incremental adjustments. And finally, we have this transformation capacity. This is about structural or systemic reconfigurations. This capacity is important as well. So these three things are altogether are important for resilience. And we studied how we could measure this resilience quantitatively in terms of indicators, and we collected data from the whole Arctic. This is work in progress. We are improving the framework. Today I will show just a big picture, but in the upcoming report we are going to unpack these indicators and go inside the industries, regions, and see the trends. So I mentioned first this persistence capacity. On the left side of the slide, you can see the overall persistence score, 1 to 10 scale. The higher, the better. You can see that Nunavut in Canada and Yukon in Canada, as well as Iceland as a whole country, they are on the top. This is overall evaluation. We measure this persistence capacity as community stability, economic growth, and income distribution. Community stability is about urban-rural divide. We look into the regions and see the demographic trends in smaller municipalities. When you look at county of Nordland, for instance, or in northern Norway, in total you can see that the demography is quite stable. Yeah, it's not that bad, but if you go inside, you can see that some larger towns and places are growing in terms of demography, but at the same time, smaller places are declining. So we found that in the Nordic part of the Arctic, at least, this is the trend. So rich gets richer, poor gets poorer, so to say. So this community stability, percentage of people living in communities with growing or stable population. You can see big differences. The next one, economic growth, is measured as average annual change in gross value added. This is long-term trend presented here from 2010 to 2020, adjusted to inflation. Yeah, you can see Magadan from Arctic Russia on the top in this respect. But you can see in terms of community stability, it's not... it's zero. So there is no people living in municipalities with growing population. Many people want to leave, but the economy is great. It's natural resource-based economy. It's controversy here. You can find quite many interesting controversies. Income distribution we measure as Gini index. This is inequality of income between rich and poor, and you see the big diversity. This Gini, something around 0.25 is very good, but when it's higher than 0.3, or it's getting worse and worse. It's a very uneven income distribution. So huge differences. The next part is about adaptation. Adaptation score is on the left side, but the indicators included here are attractivity, job creation, and education. Attractivity is measured as net migration. Roughly speaking, is it if people want to stay in the region or they want to leave? It's bottom line, the net migration. You can see big differences. Again, Iceland and Yukon are on the top, and also Västerbotten, Norrbotten in Sweden, Northern Norway they're doing great, or at least stable. And then job creation, it's annual change in number of jobs. You see some regions are generating new jobs, but the others are losing people. Education, this is percentage of people with education above basic, above high school. This is the minimum level of education you need to be able to join the labor market. You see the difference is quite big here as well. I'm not going into each single indicator. Today I want to introduce you this tool, and you can go online and learn more about the results. And as said, more reports are coming, and we will go inside the regions, and it will be possible to unpack and see the trends, maybe even at municipality level. Also, we are going to include some measures of local democracy measures, like participation in local municipality level elections. So how much people are interested in the issues around them, or maybe they just say, okay, we cannot change any politics. We'll see. So some local municipality indicators are to be included. Final slide is about transformation capacity. It's difficult to measure, difficult to get comparable data, but at least one indicator we have for the whole Arctic. This is percentage of people working in knowledge-intensive services. Knowledge-intensive services. It's technical and professional services, consultancies, IT, real estate, insurance, financial. So these are jobs for highly educated people and gender-balanced industries. Most gender-balanced industries is highly educated people are in this area, and this is important for transformation. You see, for example, on the right side, it's R&D and business. It's connected somehow, but we could not collect data for the whole Arctic. It's R&D staff per 10,000 employed. But there is a correlation between this share of knowledge-based services and R&D in business. You see here that Northern Territories, Nunavut, and Yukon of Canada, they are on the bottom. So they're very strong in terms of natural resource-based economies. But when it comes to innovation economy, it's way to go. Yeah, so that was a very brief introduction to this tool. Please go online, check regions, indicators, and yeah, there is to expect some more in this research. So I would like to stop here. This is some information about the project. Our website, LinkedIn, which is weekly updated. Yeah, our partners, sponsors, and so on. So I hope you got some introduction to your discussion. So thank you very much once again. That was a pleasure.
Dag, thank you. So for this evening's conversation is around inaction and overreaction in the Arctic concerning climate change, resilience, and security. And you'll see our panelists this evening are coming from a array of background, expertise, and knowledge. And it's an absolute privilege for me to be able to introduce them and welcome them individually so that I can give them a little background on who they are, starting with, but in no particular order, and I'm sure he'll be pretty stoked about this, Andre. So Andre, originally from, please come on up. Originally from Penetanguishene, Ontario, Andre now proudly calls Iqaluit Nunavut home, currently serving as the Director of Intergovernmental Relations in the Government of Nunavut's Department of Executive and Intergovernmental Affairs. Andre is an advocate for the interests of Nunavut Miut at both the domestic and international levels. In his role, he acts as a policy resource to assist and advise the government of Nunavut on a wide range of matters involving the circumpolar region. Andre holds a BCL LLB from McGill University's Faculty of Law, where he earned the distinction of being distinction of being selected as class valedictorian. Additionally, he holds an honors degree in speech communication and business from the University of Waterloo. Throughout his career, Andre's work has largely reflected his commitment to community engagement and equity. For example, as the first ever Indigenous liaison officer for the University of Waterloo, he pioneered significant changes in recruitment and admission policies to better serve Indigenous students and communities. Presently, Andre actively contributes to his community as a volunteer with the Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, where he assists in search and rescue operations. Oh, I just skipped that completely, did I not? Oh, no. Is that you? Yeah. Okay. Okay, excellent. I'm glad I didn't mess that up. Sorry about that, guys. Where he assists in search and rescue operations in Nunavut and as a board member and volunteer at the Niqit Nunavut Food Bank. So welcome to Andre. Seiji, Sayaj, sorry, Solbak, please come on up. So she is the festival director of the Ridu Ridu Festival in Troms, Norway since 2022. Ridu is one of the world's largest Indigenous festivals and uniquely in Europe. She has led her first successful festival in 2023 and has big plans for the upcoming years. She has a background as a journalist in NRK Sápmi and has been engaged in many civil society organizations both in northern Norway and Oslo area. Welcome. Jackie Jacobson. Jackie Jacobson, elected in the 16th Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories in 2007 to represent Nunavut, secured re-election in 2011 for the 17th Legislative Assembly. Serving as Speaker from October 27, 2011 to 2015, he later became MLA from 2019 to 2023. Beyond his legislative roles, Mr. Jacobson has been a dedicated member of the Tuktoyaktuk community, holding positions on the Hamlet Council, serving as mayor for 2 terms, and as a Hamlet councillor for 2 terms. His extensive community involvement includes roles in the Tuktoyaktuk Community Corporation, Community Recreation Board, Tuktoyaktuk Housing Board, Inuvialuit Development Corporation, and the Human Resources Board with Nortoria. As a 23-year member and sergeant in the Canadian Rangers, Mr. Jacobson also contributed to the Junior Rangers and local search and rescue. With a rich history of volunteerism, he has been an active member of the Tuktoyaktuk Fire Department for 25 years. Professionally, Mr. Jacobson has diverse experience, including roles as community constable, bylaw officer, and construction inspector with TransCanada Pipelines. In his leisure, he engages in family activities, traditional harvesting practices, and dog mushing, achieving success in Peter Norberg Memorial Dog Race. He is married to Jenny, and they share the joy of raising 7 children. Please welcome Jackie. Whitney Leckenbauer, I hope I said that right. I'm so sorry. One of Canada's foremost experts on Arctic history and contemporary northern policy, Professor Lackenbauer's research explores the evolution of Canada's domestic strategies for the North and its international relationships with other Arctic and non-Arctic states. Together with his team, he is also investigating how northern communities have shaped and been shaped by different understandings of the region. Professor Leckenbauer has his team want to shed light on the role that Northern and Indigenous stakeholders should play in these discussions to better reflect community interests. Ultimately, they hope to encourage evidence-based policymaking that transcends traditional academic boundaries and disciplines and is animated by a strong commitment to social justice. Professor Lackenbauer strives to teach students to think critically, to ask good questions, and to measure evidence and interpretation. He continuously mentors promising undergraduates and graduate students in advanced research techniques and considers research assistantships an integral part of his teaching responsibilities, with research assistants often co-authoring papers with him. His external funding that supports Trent student involvement includes the Canada Research Chair Program, the North American and Arctic Defense and Security Network, Department of National Defense Mobilizing Insights and Defense and Security Collaborative Network Grant, and SSHRC funded projects with youth resilience and community resilience in Canada's Northern Territories, measuring the success of junior Canadian Rangers and capacity building for community-based maritime and coastal search and rescue and emergency response in Nunavut. Please welcome Whitney. Wonderful. So thank you all so much for participating in this evening's panel. I do have a question that I'll have you guys pass around this handy mic that I should be holding on to. There you go. It doesn't have to start with you. So what specific issues related to inaction or overreaction in Canada's in Arctic, concerning climate resilience and security, do you find most pressing and personally impactful?
Everybody's looking at me. So maybe I'll elevate this up to something very, very big and conceptual. I think we heard a statement by the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs today talking about green transitions, and something that yourself, Ambassador Dion, as Minister both of Environment, Climate Change Canada now, and Foreign Affairs, pursued vigorously. I think one of the issues that's emerging is what I might refer to as the not in my backyard approach to thinking about what this transition looks like. So very ambitious timelines and agendas, I might say over-ambitious in some respects. But some of the stressors I see between the need for critical minerals, looking at Western democratic integrity of value chains so that we're not reliant upon competitors, even adversaries, for critical supplies to undergo this transition, with understandable concerns amongst some northern rights holders about what the impacts of this development will have on their homelands and on their health and on their peoples. So I see this as a looming issue because perhaps nobody wants that development to be taking place in their backyard. Yet in essence, to undergo the global changes that are required to deal with the global drivers that are accelerating Arctic climate change, if you're seeing it, I don't know that we have clarity on these issues. And quite frankly, I don't know that we're having healthy discussions about these issues that are required. So to take this to a security piece, these are exactly the kinds of, I think, pressure points that we might see foreign interference undermining or hijacking some of our important democratic debates. And this is not exclusive to Canada. Certainly within Sapmi, over windmills and things, there's similar, I think, discussions going on. So trying to figure out how do we sort of better understand how we're going to be managing this transition and what the implications are for if we're going to really achieve the sustainable development that's led by northern rights holders.
I guess from a community standpoint, I mean, with the global warming and the water warming up 0.5 a degree, you know, we're seeing fishes and different species coming into our waters now. And it's really quite concerning. And Mr. Dion said about plankton, or that's not, we used to have it at the mouth of our harbor. It's dying away, but we have a community-based initiative with the Arctic Research Foundation that we're working with community-based knowledge in regards to working with our elders and our youth in regards to whatever is concerning to them. So that was what they wanted to work on. So that's what we're seeing what's the impacts of that, and there is a big impact in regards to that. So we're community-based knowledge and that with our elders, and taking it that in that way, and just seeing what's important to our community. So. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I first off want to acknowledge that we are in Sápmi right now and on Sami land, as I heard Norway a lot of times. So I just want to acknowledge this is a coastal Sami area where we are right now, where it has been traditionally reindeer herder grazing areas. So it's a lot that keeps me up at night, but I'll try to keep it short. Right now, of course, in this last year, we have had a new term that has been very, very relevant for our communities, which has been green colonialism, where you explode, where there's exploitation of indigenous lands in order to give room for green energy, where we have been seeing wind turbines put on indigenous lands and grazing areas that reindeer herders are dependent on in order for their culture to survive. So for sure that keeps me up at night, and of course the lack of willingness of the people leading this who are going to answer to this climate change and solve the issue. And I can use one example just to have the perspective. In those debates that were now last year, the minister said in the debate that, well, Sami reindeer herding areas, grazing areas, are 40% of this country. Which is a very big number for a very small people, you could say. But it's actually wrong and false. Statistics show it's 4.4% of this land, which isn't that much anymore. So we see a lot of fake arguments or false statistics that we have to destruct in some way. So yeah, that's one thing that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, the good question. Thank you. I want to speak as not only a member of the public service of the government of Nunavut, which is a subnational government, but also as a concerned Nunavummiut, someone who resides in Nunavut. Nunavut is a very large territory with 25 communities that are all independent from each other, meaning there's no roads connecting them from one to another. And with that, there's a lot of infrastructure that is required. 25 power plants, 25 airports, 25 health centers, schools, etc. A lot of this infrastructure is aging, and aging fast, and has been aging or been old for a very long time. And I'll touch a little bit about permafrost melting. We've been seeing that, I think, as well as in Jackie's area. The permafrost melting creates great warping and shifting of landing strips at the airports, which results into some major issues because those are essentially the lifelines of the community. And so needing to upgrade and adapt to ensure that this melting permafrost does not affect the transportation of people and goods, which are so essential for these communities, is one aspect. One other aspect is with regard to power plants. Climate change and just bringing climate into the mix. It gets cold in the Canadian Arctic, and if a power plant did go out, there's a crisis at play. And when you're talking about power plants that are about 60 years old, that don't necessarily have parts available, and if there's a storm and getting in with a small runway to evacuate people, it's a very, very trying scenario and something that I hope not to see. And that means that communities must be resilient. That they must, prepare and be able to respond to this and then recover from it. And so when you talk about security and when you talk about safety, I think of it on the community level. If you want peace and stability within a community, ensuring that you have redundancies and you have contingency plans and scenarios is one aspect. So the inaction of getting some new power generation, I think, is one aspect of that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all. So I guess speaking of climate change, then there's so much interconnectedness that I'm hearing from everyone, and one thing that I'm hearing as well is the economy as well, and infrastructure and economy and what this means, and we see this connectedness. So considering this, how crucial is it to prioritize economic development in the Arctic? Up to what extent should we concentrate on resource development, and what measures can be taken to ensure that economic benefits stay within the region of the Arctic?
Thank you for that. No, in regards to, I'm born and raised in Tuktoyaktuk. I'm an inevaluate beneficiary. I sat on numerous boards. With the climate change that we have going on, I'm really happy that our federal government is helping with our demapping project in regards to building our retaining wall to save my home community of Tuktoyaktuk. So that's happening this year. So that's a little bit of, we have 2.5 years of employment, so we're really thankful for that. And I'm speaking as a councillor of the hamlet of Tuk and a community corp member. The biggest thing that we have to take notice is we are, as an Aboriginal person, we have land claims and we should be able to do what we want on our own land. So, but at the end of the day, our federal government has to, I guess with the global warming and everything that's going on, we got to work hand in hand to try to extract, but in our, with our Aboriginal groups and the federal government working together hand in hand. And if that's the way they want to go, let's do it. If not, we won't. But global warming, and it takes money to live. And like we said earlier today, that a lot of our youth and that, they don't have no jobs to come home, to stay home, so they got to all move away. My first 4 oldest kids are all living in the Yukon, having good, successful jobs. And you wish to have them home, but you can't because there's nothing going on long term. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is the Aboriginal groups, the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation has a signed land claim, and in our country, we do have our own rights, and we should be able to access our renewable resources and extract what we want to extract, but in meaningful participation.
Yeah, I think finding the right balance has been a persistent issue. So I always say in Canada, we've almost had the same northern strategy going back to 1970, and it's balancing off people, it's balancing off economic futures, and looking at issues of, and now I'm blanking on the other one. I usually mix in something about sovereignty because it's usually there in some level, but balancing off people, economies, and environment. And when I look at the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, which is not a strategy, but is sometimes, I think, misrepresented as one, there's something in there for everybody, but by being there for everybody, it doesn't really paint a very coherent picture of what the envisioned northern economy for Canada actually looks like. So we'll all agree that a diversified economy is a beneficial thing. Within the vision, though, being presented, it has a traditional extractive resource economy. It has then a conservation economy tied to some of the statements about action on pan-Arctic marine protected areas and the roles of, say, Inuit within Inuit Nunangat as stewards of their waters. At the same time, it's got, that language around subsistence economies, traditional economies. Well, traditional doesn't mean historic. Those are very real economies now and have been continuously since time immemorial. And I still think the struggle is that there isn't a coherent vision, to be quite frank. and that we often rely upon these amorphous terms that resonate with me and that I see are positive, like sustainable development, but they often, I think, suppress some of those real core debates about how we're going to manage pressures and even frictions between different futures. And how do we make sure that at the end of the day, it's Indigenous rights holders and who will have a core say, but at the same time that there's a dialogue, because let's face it, a lot of the investment to enable those different futures is coming globally. And certainly from across Canada. So to really having spaces for these conversations, but getting into those uncomfortable areas and having those frank discussions while making sure that these are discussions that are empowering and respectful of appropriate rights holders.
Yeah, I will continue on the green energy because it's very much in the wind right now in Sápmi. So of course, there's a big process problem, I would say, here in Norway, whereas, for example, for green energy and wind powers, it's the government or often foreign wind power a firm or a corporation that comes and wants to build windmills in a specific place, and then they have already decided on where it should be. And then they involve the Indigenous people or the people that really use the land. And then it's too late because it's already decided that it's going to be there. And a great example of that in this panel, I of course have to mention the Fosen case, which has been going on here, where it's we are now on day 841 of a human rights violation here in Norway, and it was the Fosen Sami reindeer herders that took the government to court as there were built over 100 windmills on their traditional grazing areas, took them to Supreme Court, and a united Supreme Court ruled the government's license invalid. So the Fosen reindeer herders won in Supreme Court. The windmills are still running over 2 years later. And after large demonstrations, one of the families, there are two families, one of the families have gotten into an agreement after being pressured for over 20 years and been fighting for their rights. Now they will get some amount of money every year these windmills are going, and as long as the license is valid. But the other ones, the other family said yes to I think it was 67 windmills on the grazing area, but said no to the 100 others. And still they built them all on their traditional lands. And this is a great way. I think there's a very easy solution to these things, and that's some reindeer herders have been in the media and said, I welcome wind power and windmills if I get to be beside you at the table and decide where they will be put. But they are getting involved too late in the process, and not getting anything of the millions that are being earned by their lands being exploited. I don't know, but you get me. Yeah, I'm sorry. 3 languages in my head right now.
Yeah, I'd like to turn it to a little bit on economic development, but also natural resources. Ambassador Dion mentioned the melting sea ice, and that is proving to be an opportunity, but also a challenge at the same time. This past year, from what I heard, it's the first time that cargo ships, specifically for cargo, sailed through the Northwest Passage. If I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at Whitney just to double check, but I believe there was 4 of them that not for tourism purposes, but simply for making a shortcut. And we're going to see increasing boat traffic, whether that be tourism for cruises, but also adventure tourists, so small crafts, or big ships carrying lots of goods. And so with that, we need to ensure, as Canada, that we have opportunities to ensure emergency responsiveness. Because right now, it's very difficult to help someone in distress going through those waters in the far north. And so when there is a crisis, usually that puts an undue strain on communities in terms of their response. They have limited resources, limited personnel, and we need to have a better balance of ensuring that this can be a safe operation if it's done well, and also taking consideration other ramifications from boat traffic that you see, so underwater noise, for example. So that's what I would like to highlight with that.
Great. So given the multitude of challenges confronting the Arctic, Indigenous voices highlight shifts in sea ice, weather patterns, water composition, and ecosystems, jeopardizing traditional practices that are integral to community security. In light of this, what role does Indigenous knowledge play in stabilizing the region and addressing ongoing changes?
Yeah, no, like I said earlier, our sea ice, it's like, it's diminishing. Back home now, you used to be able to read the weather. It's very seldom you're gonna get it right now. Weather change, more high winds. For global warming, you know, I left home the other day, it was minus 51. With the wind chill, it was like 56, 57. So it's really nice to be here. But, you know, you're looking at people that my Inuvialuit people back home were resilient in regards to living off the land. Any impacts like this impacts the food on our table. You know, our elders, we keep hearing it from our elders, and we put a big push on with our Inuvialuit Game Council, who represents us at globally, with YMAC and the different committees that we do have with the IRC, Inuvialuit Regional Corporation. And we really have to be watching and how we're sustaining ourselves in regards to the wind. I get like so much wind, people are taking more chances in regards to having to go further for hunting, and it's just unsafe. And and with our Canadian Ranger program, with the AIS system, the shipping part that we do have AIS systems with the capability in my home community at Tuck now. So you're actually seeing the ships going through if their AIS system's turned on. If not, you're not, they're blind. But I think I guess the biggest thing for me is what I listen to my elders in putting food on the table from traditionally, and that's the biggest worry we have coming now is traditional foods and the safety of harvesting.
Yeah, thank you. I think building on some comments that Andre made and Jackie's just brought up too, I think to answer your question, the role of Indigenous knowledge, Inuit, Kanjit, I'm sorry, I probably butchered that badly, but I tried. Thank you very much, IQ, is very central and is increasingly reflected in both policies and practices as being integral. And I think we can look at the Canadian Rangers as an example. So a community-based organization, yes, enabled by, supported by, trained by the military, but really rooted in traditional knowledge and local knowledge as being essential. So a strengths-based approach, looking at what capacity communities have, rather than the traditional deficit-based approaches that almost seem to insinuate that there is a need for Halunaq for Southern help. So I think we're seeing that in Inuit Guardians programs. We could turn to the Yukon and look at community public safety officer programs, myriad of organizations that are not only using, as has always been done, that knowledge to serve communities, but also using it to better inform tools outside of communities and beyond. Where I think the real opportunity space comes is making sure that that information that is pulled, that essential information that is pulled from communities, is also returned to communities in usable formats so that we get out of the long-standing colonial mindset that communities provide information without actually being beneficiaries. So I think that's an opportunity space rooted in this deepening awareness of how essential Inuit knowledge and Indigenous knowledge more generally is, but at the same time how it is also can benefit at the community level from these interactions with other ways of knowing being seen.
Yeah, I think it's a good saying that is like nothing about us without us. And I think that's very important when talking about the Arctic as well. And I also always try to say that, like, imagine how lucky we are in the Arctic, where we have such a diverse so many diverse indigenous groups that have lived by the land and kept the culture alive and kept the connection to our land alive for so long and still do today. There's no other than indigenous people that know their land as well. So to use that as a voice and also listen to them and invite them in from the beginning of these processes is extremely important. But then I also want to address a great issue I see with this. Indigenous or Sami voices are being invited in into the big powers table and get a seat at that table, but still the Sami parliament last year declared a trust crisis between the Sami people and the government. So we see that when we don't have any trust that the government will listen to us if we are at that table, we don't want to sit there and use our resources and time to do so. So that is a really big issue right now, and I also see how vulnerable our culture is. If you, for instance, see the reindeer herders, they are getting so much external pressure, extremely much from climate change. You know, with the reindeers not. And you probably have the same in Nunavut, where it's ice under the snow, so that they don't get down to their food and don't find the moss. So the reindeer herders the last years have had to feed their reindeers with kraftfood or concentrated foods, which again is soy from Brazil, from the Amazon, which again does bad things to our relatives in Brazil. So it's a evil circle right there. But in addition to climate change that we are experiencing and the pressure from that, we are experiencing pressure of different land destructions as minings, as wind powers. So there's a lot of constant pressure. And if I use the Fosen Sami again as an example, they have been fighting, for this case, they're not a big family, but they have been fighting against the government for over 20 years. And I think the one daughter said it really well when she said that she has lost her entire culture and her entire knowledge. She hasn't even learned the language because her father has her whole life been fighting and been resilient. So their knowledge is being lost right now. So it's so vulnerable. So how can we answer to that if we're constantly being pressured and losing the knowledge that we once had?
Yeah. So Indigenous practices in addressing climate change and other events is essential in the North. We see it every day. The issue that I see, people see, usually I'm told secondhand, but it's the changes, right? I've only lived in Iqaluit for about just over 3 years, but it's the changes in the unpredictability of climate. Whether the bay will freeze before Christmas becomes a question. Whether the caribou can actually get to the lichen is another question, right? Where's the fish going, and when are they coming? When are they migrating down the river, right? So these changes, these unpredictabilities, really throw a rhythm and that synergy into question. And so Indigenous practices, as I see it, is the adaptability of that. How do we better adapt to ensure that we can continue our practices, continue sustainability, and ensure that those traditions live, but while dealing and kind of buffering from those external factors, such as climate change.
Great. Just looking at the time, perhaps I'll leave one question for one of the panels to answer, and I'll go to the audience to see if there are any questions for the panelists. So the question is, the issues we discussed today have global implications. How can we strike a balance in the participation of non-Arctic states in governing the region? And what safeguards are necessary to guarantee that decisions regarding the Arctic genuinely serve the well-being of its Arctic residents? Anybody want to answer that?
Oh my gosh, but in 30 seconds or less. No, but it's a very important question, Crystal, so I'm not dismissive of it. I think this is an ongoing discussion, and it is, I think my view as a Canadian is seeing governance as primarily rooted in residents of the Arctic, in Arctic rights holders. I think of the Inuit Circumpolar Council's Declaration on the Rights of Inuit and Inuit Nunaat, the Inuit homeland, crossing 4 nation states. And in the start, it talks about Inuit as citizens of nation states with all the rights of every citizen, and then works through a list of all the different rights that Inuit have as Indigenous peoples, as Arctic Indigenous peoples, as Inuit. And I think about that as also meaning that that statement of sovereignty says that in some ways, Inuit as a self-determining people have the right to have their states act on their behalf. And in Canada, we have land claim agreements where that sovereignty is in essence shared between the federal government and Inuit and recognized. So if we're engaging with non-Arctic states, and if they're engaging with an understanding both of the Indigenous rights that ground where there's appropriate relationships, the nation states and having those rights in the Arctic, then I think there's a ground for collaborative, productive, respect-based progress. I think in areas where those rights are not understood or are poorly understood, there is real danger still, and that we need to be attentive to those and make sure that as we're going forward, that we are making sure within our respective states where we're going through processes of reconciliation and understand that those processes are formally beginning in parts of Sapmi as well. And I think we're still in progress in Canada of coming to terms. We need to be very careful to make sure that we're protecting those very important relationships within our countries and not allowing non-Arctic actors to come and perhaps pull some of the attention away or distract things. When we talk about reaction, overreaction, one of my worries is that the global pressures that you mentioned can end up taking us to a frame of approaching Arctic issues like they are inherently about geopolitics and global politics at the expense of really focusing the lion's share, the heart of our energies at those relationships with Arctic peoples. And my fear always is that our overreaction can pull us away from really needing to strike a balance and make sure that we're looking at the and. We need to be dealing with both simultaneously, but making sure we never lose sight of where the heart is of our respective sovereignties.
Great, thank you so much for that. I think, do you have something you want to say, Ian?
Yeah, I was struck by something that a panelist on the lunchtime or post-lunchtime meeting said. I believe his name was Oren. He said the Arctic Council is part of a tapestry, right? I think it should be undisputed that governments led by Northern people, communities, and states deal with Northern issues and Arctic issues, and I think that's really important. And I think the Arctic Council is a perfect forum for that. And with that, it kind of breathes beyond that to other multilateral organizations, other functions of law and order, whether that be the UN or multilateral declarations, say the fisheries, for example. And I think this is an important aspect to get the buy-in of the greater global community when it comes to the Arctic. The governance part should stay within the Arctic. However, the buy-in and the adhering and the understanding and the learning should then be expanded to the global, because it is very much, it concerns them as well, and you don't want to disregard that, and you don't want to cause factions or fill a vacuum with other players. So this is something that I'm firmly believing, and I was pretty inspired by that mentioned earlier today. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Before you guys jump out, how about a big round of applause for our panelists here? Are there, we have time for maybe 2 questions. Is there any questions in the audience here? Yeah?
Hi, hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful insights about climate change, economy, as well as resiliency of northern communities. My name is Pearl. Currently, I'm residing in Ottawa, but I have been living more than half of my life in the Yukon. And some things that I have heard that, in terms of exchanging discussion, is seeing the observations or the changes, the impacts of infrastructure, or the impacts of climate change on infrastructure. And I guess I would just like to ask or know more about what do you think is the best approach or already existing approach in, to ensure the emergency responses in northern communities?
So I can go quickly. I think it's also looking at models on multiple scales. So in some cases, different types of emergencies are going to require national assets. So in Norway, joint rescue coordination centers, 2 air bases that can respond to either a mass rescue operation or a search and rescue that exceed the capacity of a local area. I'm a big proponent in a lot of the work in partnership with northern rights holders and stakeholders to think about how we can invest in right capabilities at the community level to reduce the dependency on outside responses. So if we look at vulnerabilities of infrastructure, say connecting communities, as Andre mentioned, the more you can ensure that communities are resilient, feel empowered, have a sense of fate control, and are equipped through training and the right sort of physical equipment to be able to respond, to me, the better. And then you can bring in those national assets to surge in to help where required. But I think this is a mindset change because a lot, especially on the part of our national governments, the focus is on those big national investments rather than focusing on building up and making those investments at the community level. And at least our research suggests that this is where you actually get the best return on investment. And creative organizations like the Canadian Rangers, where Jackie uses his own equipment to go out as a ranger and that gets reimbursed when he's using his snowmobile or whatever. It's a beautiful model because unlike most members of the military who have that equipment provided, they're not allowed to take that military equipment out without asking permission and they'll get told no. Jackie gets to use his snowmobile and go out with his family and pick berries or go hunting and fishing when he likes. So I think there's wonderful opportunities at the local level to really focus on empowerment.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to conclude the panel, but really appreciate everyone's input this evening and providing your perspectives and your views, and for the audience for joining in today. So hope you all have a wonderful evening and a great rest of your time during this conference. Thank you.